Okay, so let's talk about arrays a little bit. Really, we've already used arrays. Arrays are really just lists, as I mentioned before in the other video. So a list, a basic list, is, of course, simply identifying with brackets and having some items in your list. So this list here is simply a one-dimensional array. That's another way to identify it. And other languages use that terminology, and there is actually an object in Python called an array, but we are not going to deal with that right now. We are simply going to use lists of lists and talk about arrays in that way. So I'm going to review here very quickly list comprehension because it's one way to create a very simple array. So in our collaborative game, it's a text-based game, but if we want to kind of visualize that game in a very simple way, we could create a board, a 10 by 10 board with numbers that identify the location. This is actually not going to accomplish that exactly, but it will give you an idea of where you might go with creating an array. So what this does here is I've got my world, and I'm going to generate a list of numbers, 10 numbers, and 10 lists. So this first thing creates a list inside of this larger list 10 times. So if I run this, I've actually already run it once, but we'll look at it again. So you can see here that I have a list, 10 lists of 10 numbers. Not particularly useful really because we have the same numbers over and over again. What we could do is create a list and increment that number every time, which would mean that we would need to go through this list and add over time. I've done that, I could do that, and then you'd end up with 10 lists. The first list starts at 0, the last list ends at 99. That might be useful to you, but a more simple way of doing it might be to simply do the same thing that we just did, except instead of generating numbers, we just simply generate a dash that's going to represent our world here. And I need to add another bracket around the outside. So now I do the same thing that I did to create this list of numbers, except that I'm just going to create 10 lists with 10 dashes each. All right, also not very exciting. So we need to represent our world a little bit better. But this is what one would call an array. We have a list of lists. It is a multi-dimensional array. We have 10 lists, so we have 10 dimensions we can go through. So if we wanted to print out each dash, actually, let's do it this way, that'll be clearer. So we need to go through the first part, and then we need to go through the last part. This is looking familiar. So what is this going to look like? When I hit enter, it should just print dashes all the way down the screen, a big long vertical line of dashes. And voila, we have a vertical line of dashes. Well, that's not really very representative of a world, is it? No. So we could add to this. One thing that we might add is some space here so we can print that. And Python has this lovely little way of ending our lines. So we're going to put a space here as well. and this should result, voila. Now, this is a better visualization of our array. So we have 10 rows of 10 dashes each. Now, if I wanted to put, say, a player at some point in my world, I actually know, let's say I want to put it right here. I know exactly where that is because that is simply an internal list within our list, right? So if I count down, we start at 0, correct? So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is the 7th list. And this would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Ha, funny how that works out. So if I want to change the 7th item in the 7th list to be a P, because that's where I want my player to start. Now, if I go back and print, we see a P in that spot. So that is the nice thing about lists, or about constructing a world this way, in that you can see, now let's say I want to put in the 3rd list, 5th index over, I want to put a treasure chest represented by a T. So now once again I print my world out and I have a representation here of my treasure chest and my P. Now if you'll recall, this should look somewhat familiar when we were working with CSV files or with text files for that matter. You have lines that you process, or rows, and then in those rows are individual words. So this is the exact same thing. We are going through a list which has internal lists in it, and we're going to print each item, or do whatever we need to do to each item. And we could add things to them, we could remove them, we could do whatever we want. Okay. So that's the basics of arrays. So your assignment is actually to create a list of lists that would represent a game board. So your options are, you could create tic-tac-toe, you could create another version of the world that we're using for our game, something like what I did with the dashes, only it could be something different. You could create checkers or chess, so you could represent the board. You could use letters, you could use spaces, a series of spaces and lines. You could use whatever you want, and then of course you have to represent the pieces in some way. You could create a boggle board, also quite simple. You could try to create a word find board. So that last one is a little bit more complicated, but you could try it and you could see if you could get it to at least look right, even if your words are not laid out exactly the way that you wanted them. So that's where you're going from here. So you're going to start with a list of lists. You can either auto-generate it the way that I did using list comprehension or looping or whatever you might want to do, or you can create it from scratch. So for example, if I were going to create something that looks like a boggle board, I might have a list of lists that has different letters in it. There are actually on the internet several different boggle dice representations. So if you wanted to see what those look like, you could do that. I'm just going to do a couple here so you can just get the general idea. You obviously have to have a number of E's. So I have a list of lists. This would just simply create either 2 rows of 5 or 5 rows of 2. So 4 list in, or 4 dice, I guess, in Boggleboard. And if you want to print some space between each row, you would simply add this. And then for letter in dice, we're going to print a letter, and we're going to end each row with a space so that we actually print each one. So we have 2 rows of 5. So the cool thing about this is our representation looks like this, but then we can also access each dice, so we can check and make sure that those letters are in our board and that kind of thing. So that is your task, to try to create a representation of a game board using a list of lists to help sort of solidify the idea of having multi-dimensional arrays. All right, good luck.